So a delivery van pulls up to your curb,
Right.
and there's no engine rumble,
Yeah.
no exhaust smell, just the soft, quiet crunch of tires on the pavement.
Yeah, it's almost stealthy.
Exactly. You might peek out your window, see the driver hop out with a package and think, oh, neat, an electric van.
Which is a totally fair reaction, honestly. It's tempting to look at those quiet vans and just assume they're, I don't know, a corporate public relations move.
Yeah.
Or maybe some slow experimental pilot program.
Right, like a test run.
Exactly. But what we're actually witnessing right now, what is happening out on the streets in 2026, is a hard-nosed, highly profitable operational reality. Like the transition period. It's over. The reality is completely set in.
It really has. And, I mean, we've got a massive stack of 2026 data sheets, industry reports, and market forecasts right here to prove it.
Yeah.
So the mission for this deep dive, we are going to trace the entire life cycle of this commercial electric vehicle revolution.
And it is a massive revolution.
It really is. We're looking at the delivery vans themselves, the cutting-edge batteries powering them, the AI tracking their health, and the sort of futuristic charging infrastructure keeping them on the road. Okay, let's unpack this.
So for you listening to this, whether you happen to be, say, a logistics manager trying to balance a massive fleet budget.
Which sounds incredibly stressful, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
Lovely.
Or, if you're just someone wondering how your online orders suddenly started arriving like stealth ninjas. The truly fascinating part is why 2026 is the tipping point.
Right. Why now?
Yeah, this is the year where the math simply makes too much sense to ignore.
So to understand the macro trends in all this infrastructure, we have to start with the vehicles themselves. Like, why are delivery companies suddenly buying these vans in absolute droves right now?
It's all about the numbers.
Yeah. Looking at a massive cost analysis guide from Recharge, it literally all comes down to one single metric, which is total cost of ownership, or TCO.
Yeah, TCO is basically the absolute holy grail for fleet managers. I mean, when you run a business, you don't just look at the sticker price of a vehicle.
You'd go out of business pretty fast if you did.
Exactly. You're looking at the total cost to buy, fuel, maintain, and eventually dispose of that asset over its entire working life. And what the 2026 data shows us is that the TCO parity between gas and electric has finally hit this massive sweet spot.
And a very specific sweet spot.
Right. So if you've got a delivery fleet running, say, 25,000 to 35,000 miles annually, the payback window for an electric van has actually shrunk down to just 2.5 to 4 years.
The specific numbers here are kind of mind-blowing, honestly.
Yeah.
Let's work through a real-world scenario for a second. Say you have a traditional gas van operating for 5 years.
Okay.
Between the wildly fluctuating price of gas, the oil changes, the transmission fluid, the brake pads, all those constantly moving parts, that van is going to cost you roughly $35,000 in energy and maintenance over those 5 years.
Which adds up so fast.
It really does. Yeah, but an electric van, that costs just $12,500 over the exact same period.
Wow. So, I mean, if you do the math, which means you're keeping about $22,500 per van in your pocket over a 5-year lifespan.
Right. And that easily offsets the higher upfront purchase price at the dealership. Your fuel costs are slashed by, like, 60 to 75%.
And maintenance drops significantly too, right?
Yeah, maintenance drops by 30 to 60%. Because honestly, an electric motor just has fundamentally fewer moving parts to break. It's a much simpler machine.
And this mathematical reality is completely transforming the market landscape right now. We're seeing major players completely dominating the streets in 2026.
Like Rivian, right?
Exactly. You've got the Rivian EDV, which it already captured about 66% of the U.S. electric cargo van market back in 2024, and they are still expanding.
It's crazy how fast they moved.
It really is. Then you have the Ford E-Transit and the Mercedes E-Sprinter, which are leading the charge for, traditional full-size vans. Plus, we're seeing these entirely new niche, purpose-built step vans entering the fray.
Oh, like the workhorse vans?
Yeah, the Workhorse W56, which specifically targets those heavy FedEx-style walk-in routes.
It really makes me think about the technology adoption curve. Buying an internal combustion engine delivery van in 2026, it's basically like buying a brand new DVD player in 2010.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right. Like, sure, maybe it's a little cheaper at the register today, but you are buying into an ecosystem that is just structurally obsolete. It's going to bleed you dry on operating costs over the next 5 years while the rest of the world has completely moved on.
Yeah, and to take that DVD player analogy a step further, it's also about using the technology for its intended purpose.
Yeah.
The secret to this math isn't just that, electricity is cheaper than gas.
Right, there's more to it.
Much more. It's about what the industry calls duty cycles. Like, you don't buy an electric delivery van to take on a massive cross-country road trip.
Because charging on the highway is a whole different beast.
Exactly. You buy it for highly predictable 80 to 150-mile daily routes, and crucially, routes with incredibly high stop counts.
Oh, because of regenerative braking.
Precisely. Regenerative braking is where the electric motor basically runs in reverse to slow the vehicle down. It captures that kinetic energy and feeds it right back into the battery.
So every time they stock, they're basically refueling a tiny bit.
Exactly. Every single time that van stops at a house to drop off a package, it's recapturing energy. In a gas van, all that stopping and starting just burns more fuel and totally grinds down your brake pads. But in an EV, it's an environment built perfectly for the technology to actually thrive.
But wait, here's where the whole DVD player analogy hits a brick wall. That math sounds incredible on paper, right?
Yeah.
But it completely falls apart if the van literally can't function when the temperature drops.
The winter problem.
Yeah. If I'm delivering packages in North Dakota in January, a traditional lithium-ion battery might seriously struggle. The cold just, kills the range. Which brings us directly to this massive leap in battery chemistry documented in a recent Sustainable Truck and Van magazine report.
Yeah, the winter problem has definitely always been the Achilles heel of fleet electrification. But in 2026, we're seeing the launch of the Tech Trans Dissecant by CATL.
Okay, tell me about this, because this sounds huge.
It is a genuinely pivotal moment for the industry. CATL has introduced the first mass-produced sodium-ion battery that is specifically engineered for light commercial vehicles operating in severe cold.
Okay, let's talk about the specs on this thing, because they're frankly hard to believe. It's a 45 kilowatt-hour capacity battery, but here is the kicker. It can be plugged in and charged at temperatures as low as negative 30 degrees Celsius.
Which is incredibly cold.
It's freezing.
Yeah.
And even at negative 40 degrees Celsius, the battery still preserves 90% of its usable capacity. Plus, it features ultra-fast charging, going from 20% to 80% in just 30 minutes at negative 15 degrees Celsius.
Which is exactly why CATL is pushing what they call a dual-star trajectory.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they're deploying both sodium-ion and traditional lithium-ion cells at scale in 2026. They're basically matching the specific chemistry to the specific geographic need.
Okay, so wait. If traditional lithium-ion struggles so badly in the freezing cold, is this new sodium-ion battery basically the snow tire of battery chemistry?
Yes, that's a great way to visualize it. To understand why it's the snow tire, we really have to look at the mechanism inside the battery itself.
Okay, let's get into the chemistry a bit.
So in a traditional lithium-ion battery, the lithium ions move back and forth through a liquid electrolyte to create power. When the temperature drops below freezing, that electrolyte gets thick and viscous, kind of like cold honey.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, so the internal resistance spikes, the ions literally can't move efficiently, and your battery performance just plummets.
Which means your delivery van suddenly loses half its range, and the driver is stranded in a snowdrift somewhere.
Exactly, the nightmare scenario fleet managers desperately want to avoid. But sodium is different. While sodium ions are actually physically larger than lithium ions, the specific chemical properties of sodium and the electrolytes used in these new batteries maintain their conductivity in extreme cold.
So the resistance doesn't jump up.
Exactly. The internal resistance doesn't spike in the same way. The honey doesn't freeze.
It just keeps flowing. And sodium is incredibly abundant and cheap to mine, right?
Yeah.
Which I assume brings the manufacturing cost down.
It definitely does, but its real superpower here is that thermal stability. This chemistry effectively unlocks the entire northern hemisphere for complete fleet electrification.
That's massive.
It is. Fleet operators in places like Canada or, the American Midwest can transition their entire fleets without the constant fear of dead vans in the middle of a winter road.
Okay, so we've got the TCO math figured out, and thanks to sodium ion, we've got the winter weather conquered. But solving one problem usually creates another one.
Always does.
Right. Now that we have these advanced batteries sitting inside hundreds of thousands of vans, a totally new problem emerges. How on earth do fleet managers track the health of these massive rolling investments over a 5 to 8 year lifespan?
Right, and this is where we have to transition from talking about hardware to talking about software. And there's a really fascinating 2026 study by Geotab that sheds light on
The
this.
telematics study, right?
Yeah, they analyzed real-world data from 22,700 electric vehicles. And what they found is that average battery degradation has actually ticked up slightly to 2.3% per year compared to the 1.8% they found in previous years.
And what's driving that increase? According to the data, the main culprit is high-power DC fast charging.
Yes.
Using those massive chargers over 100 kilowatts essentially doubles degradation rates to about 3.0% per year compared to like lower power overnight AC charging, which is around 1.5%. And if you happen to be operating in a really hot climate, that heat adds another 0.4% of degradation.
Yeah, and to understand why DC fast charging hurts the battery, think about pushing water through a hose.
Okay.
AC charging is like a gentle trickle. It fills the battery slowly, keeping the internal temperature low and stable. DC fast charging, on the other hand, is like hooking that battery up to a fire hose.
Just blasting it with energy.
Exactly. Pushing that much energy that quickly generates a tremendous amount of heat and physical stress inside the battery cells. And over time, that stress degrades the chemistry.
So because of all these variables, heat, cold, charging speeds, a massive new industry has spawned. The telematics-linked fleet battery health management market is absolutely exploding right now.
Oh, the growth is staggering.
Valued at $1.4 billion in 2025, it's projecting up to $10.7 billion by 2036. And India and China are actually leading this growth. These software platforms track warranty data, degradation, thermal monitoring, basically everything happening inside that battery cell.
They ensure dispatchers know exactly how much charge and overall battery health a van has before they ever even hand the keys to a driver.
Wait, hold on. I need to push back on this a little.
Okay, go ahead.
Because 2.3% degradation a year really doesn't sound like a lot at first glance. But if you compound that, like if a fleet loses 10 to 15% of its total range over 5 years, doesn't that completely blow up the TCO and those highly predictable route planning models we talked about in Section 1?
It's a huge risk, yeah.
Right. If the van is supposed to run a 120-mile route, but its battery is degraded and it dies at mile 105, all that beautiful math is totally useless.
This is the exact concern keeping logistics managers up at night, and it's a really great point. A 15% range loss is massively significant for a commercial operation. But that is exactly why this new telematics software is worth billions of dollars.
So the software solves the degradation.
Not solves it, manages it. The new fleet mantra isn't keep everything perfect forever. The new mantra is balance.
Balance how?
Well, you don't need strict, rigid constraints where drivers are terrified to ever use a fast charger. Instead, the telematics software acts as the brain of the entire operation. It tells the operator to use the lowest charging power that meets the operational needs for that specific day, preserving the asset over the long term.
So it's actively managing the dispatching based on the battery's health.
Exactly. The software is the bridge. Picture a dispatcher looking at a screen in the morning. The software says, Van A has been in the fleet for 4 years. It has 10% degradation. Assign it to the shorter 80-mile downtown route today, where it can just use AC charging tonight.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Right. Then it says, assign Van B, which is brand new with 0 degradation, to the heavy 120-mile suburban route. It balances route demands against battery longevity dynamically every single day.
That's brilliant. It takes all the guesswork out of the degradation. You just match the degraded van to the shorter route. But to keep those batteries healthy and to keep those routes running smoothly, you need absolutely flawless charging infrastructure.
Yes, you do.
If a charger is broken, the entire delivery ecosystem grinds to a halt. Like, you can't balance your fleet if you can't actually put electricity into the vans.
The charging infrastructure is the absolute backbone of this whole operation. And keeping those chargers online has spawned yet another massive sub-industry. The predictive maintenance market for EV chargers is absolutely booming right now.
I saw that in the data.
Yeah, according to market analysts at Dayton Tello, it's expected to reach $10.6 billion by 2034.
And this is where artificial intelligence steps in, right?
Yeah.
It turns out you don't just wait for a massive commercial-grade DC fast charger, which, by the way, can cost between $50,000 and $250,000. You don't just wait for it to suddenly break.
No, that would be way too costly.
The AI and IoT sensors are now embedded deep inside these chargers. They are constantly monitoring for microscopic changes.
Yeah, they're looking for thermal anomalies in the cables, minute connector wear, even like tiny shifts in the vibrations of the cooling fans inside the charger housing.
And the data shows these AI systems can detect a failure 72 to 96 hours before the charger actually breaks.
That's a huge window.
It is. Catching it early saves operators between $350 and $1,200 per incident.
Okay.
And honestly, having this predictive AI is basically mandatory now just to meet the strict 97% uptime mandate set by the US NEVE program.
Right, the government standards.
Yeah, if you're building a network, it legally has to work 97% of the time.
But we do have to acknowledge reality here. Even with predictive AI and millions of dollars in sensors, what happens when the infrastructure still fails? Because out in the real world, it absolutely does.
Right. Enter mobile EV charging. BeeCharge data from back in 2023 showed that AAA recorded over 160,000 EV roadside assistance calls.
That is a lot of stranded drivers.
Yeah, it's a big number. So when a delivery van dies on the side of the road, mobile charging steps in. They offer on-demand charging vans that pull up to the stranded vehicle. They can add roughly 19.25 miles of range in just 30 minutes. Or, if they're using DC fast mobile units, they can dump 50 to 100 miles of range into the van right there on the shoulder of the highway.
And this mobile safety net is scaling up dramatically as the vehicles themselves get larger? Looking to the heavy-duty future, Ecoenergipika notes that megawatt charging systems, or MCS, are moving into real-world deployment in 2026.
Megawatt. That sounds insane.
It's massive. We're talking about systems that deliver over 1 megawatt of power to charge massive Class 8 semi-trucks during a driver's mandatory 45-minute break. The stakes for keeping that level of infrastructure online are just astronomical.
So, if I'm putting this all together, predictive maintenance on a commercial EV charger is basically like a smart fitness tracker.
Okay, I like this.
It monitors your heart rate and tells you, hey, your sleep is terrible and you're pushing too hard. You're going to pull a hamstring on Thursday so you can rest and stretch on Wednesday.
Right.
And the mobile EV charging, that's the ambulance that comes to scrape you off the pavement if you ignore the fitness tracker and try to run the marathon anyway.
That is a really vivid way to connect those two systems. And what's crucial to understand about the broader ecosystem is that mobile charging isn't competing with fixed infrastructure.
It's not trying to replace the charging station.
No, it's actively patching its inevitable failures. Because currently, public charger first-try success rates hover around just 55%.
55%. That is basically a coin flip on whether the pump works.
Exactly. And when you're running a logistics business with incredibly tight margins, 55% reliability is completely unacceptable. Therefore, the modal charging ambulances and the AI predictive maintenance trackers act as the dual safety nets required for this massive societal shift to actually function smoothly in the real world.
Which brings us all the way back to you listening to this right now. Like, why does all of this behind-the-scenes logistics talk matter to your everyday life?
It impacts everyone.
It really does. Because this invisible, highly optimized ecosystem of AI predictive maintenance, fleet telematics software, and cold weather sodium-ion batteries dictates the cost, the speed, and the environmental impact of literally everything delivered to your door. The next time you see a package sitting on your porch, you aren't just looking at a cardboard box. You are looking at the end result of billions of dollars of perfectly optimized data and chemistry working in absolute harmony.
And I'll leave you with a thought to mull over, something that builds on where this entire industry is heading next. Several of the sources we reviewed today repeatedly mention something called vehicle-to-grid, or V2G technology.
I've heard of this.
Yeah, this is software that turns these massive delivery vans into dynamic energy storage units. They can absorb power, sure, but they can also push power back out.
Right, turning the van into a giant battery on wheels.
Exactly. So what happens in the near future when a delivery company realizes their fleet of 5,000 electric vans sitting in a depot can actually generate more profit by selling stored electricity back to the grid during peak afternoon hours than they can by actually delivering packages?
Wait, really?
Yeah. Will logistics companies accidentally transform themselves into decentralized utility companies?
Now that is a wild thought. You start the day delivering shoes, and you end the day powering a neighborhood.
It's entirely possible.
Well, so what does this all mean? It means the future is already here, and it's being delivered quietly.